The Cotton Club, it was run by mobsters. And it wasn't necessarily a 3-year engagement. You didn't sign a contract. You had to get their permission to leave.
Oh.
So an old man was able to go out and play a couple of years of one-nighters, and he was on the condition that he would come back and do further years in the future with them.
That's Mercer Ellington, son of the great orchestra leader Duke Ellington, on what it was like to be a musician in Harlem in the 1920s and 30s. Mercer Ellington, our guest today on The Off-Ramp with Bob Smith. Welcome to The Off-Ramp with Bob Smith, a chance to slow down, steer clear of crazy, take a side road to sanity, and get some perspective on life. I grew up in an era when it was still possible here and there to see the big bands performing. As a kid, I saw the Glenn Miller Orchestra. As an adult, I saw Buddy Rich, Fred Waring, and Maynard Ferguson. Perhaps the most elegant of all of the big bands was on the jazz side. The Duke Ellington Orchestra. The Duke himself died in 1974, but 6 years later, the orchestra was still touring under the leadership of his only child, musician Mercer Ellington. On August 23, 1980, it performed at Loras College in Dubuque, Iowa, where I met the great man backstage, securing an interview with Mercer and jazz great Cootie Williams, a trumpet contemporary of Louis Armstrong. Mercer was with his dad his entire professional career. When Mercer was born, Duke Ellington was not yet a full-time musician. He made most of his living as a talented sign painter. But by the mid-1920s, Duke Ellington was a global success. So successful, he could send Mercer to study music at Columbia University and Juilliard. Beginning in the late 30s, Mercer led his own bands, working with Billy Strayhorn, Clark Terry, Cat Anderson, Cootie Williams, and Carmen McRae. But his eventual home was his father's organization, the Duke Ellington Orchestra, where he played numerous roles, including composer, arranger, trumpeter, even band manager. I was 29 years old and Mercer was 60 when we sat down to talk. I found him to be a delightful conversationalist, fun, friendly, and, like his dad, a man of impeccable manners. In a word, elegant. We spoke in a rehearsal room in the Loras College Fieldhouse shortly after the show. The result was this feature on the sophisticated nature of the Duke Ellington Orchestra.
A musical historian once wrote, "If music critics think they have to make an excuse for the big band era, the name of Duke Ellington should make any further justification unnecessary. Ellington was elegant, a smooth band leader, an accomplished pianist, and most importantly, a jazz composer with no peer, a composer who wrote with and for his orchestra. Over the years, that excitement and that freedom for musicians kept his big band together when others were falling apart. Cootie Williams is a good illustration of that. He's getting up in years now, but he's still a trumpet player. He has been professionally since 1928. In fact, he's such a great trumpet player, he's in the Jazz Hall of Fame. Over the years, he played with such great big band names as Fletcher Henderson, Chick Webb, Benny Goodman, and Duke Ellington. He even fronted his own band for 20 years. But when you ask him what band he enjoyed playing with most, he doesn't hesitate with the answer.
Duke Ellington Band.
Why was that?
I just liked his music much better because he played a more variety of music than any other band. And all the other bands played one type of music, and Ellington played symphony music, church music, anything that you wanted to go into, he had to play, you know. He had your freedom to play, yeah. And that's the reason why he kept his band together, because he wasn't limited to playing when you worked with Duke Ellington. The other bands, you were just limited to playing that same type of music all the time.
The Ellington excitement that attracted Cootie Williams in the first place recently brought him out of retirement. This time it was not Duke Ellington, but Mercer Ellington, the Duke's son. Mercer joined the band as a trumpeter and arranger and took over after his father's death. And it's obvious, listening to the music, watching the talent, and feeling the excitement, that the Duke Ellington Orchestra is still today a living, breathing musical organization, keeping on the veterans and building with the newcomers.
Well, basically, that's really what we do. We play the standards, and we particularly have to be certain that the people who have come to listen to the band in the name of Ellington will get what they expected. But we can't just limit ourselves to that, otherwise there's no development, which is one of the things that Pop taught me. He said, you always got to keep writing, you keep adding, keep trying. And generally our proving grounds for a concert is usually the dance hall. So we find something that takes the audience's liking, we decide to move it up and bring it into a concert and try it. So that from time to time we make little differences, and in hopes that if, say, we circle and come back to the same spot a year later, that the program will still be interesting and well, not necessarily quite different, but different enough not to get the feeling that you're jading yourself.
Apparently it's quite a stimulating environment for a musician.
Well, I think one of the other things, too, is the challenge, because the music he writes is always just a little edge that's away and different from just when you expect it to turn right, it goes left, and there's always some form of stimulation there. We can reach back and get things that are pretty much up to date as far as concept is concerned, so that we have two jobs with the orchestra. One is to keep the interest of the audience up, show to show, day to day, week to week, and year to year. The other is you've got to keep the interest of the men up, because they don't want to sit there and just go through the same ritual night after night. So that we continually shift things, and one of our best ways in doing this is to go back and get numbers that weren't performed too much in the recent past. We've been ordering things to be brought out of our library, like the thing we opened up with East St. Louis Toodler, which hadn't been played for years.
That's pretty old. That was one of the first songs, wasn't it?
Right, and Ring Them Bells came out of the first picture he appeared in with Amos and Andy. So we're reaching to get these things, and they have interest not only to the fan that's followed the band for years, but with the younger set, they're kind of beginning to study and want to know what happened back there in that era.
In addition to songs like East St. Louis Toodaloo, which you're hearing right now in the original 1927 recording from Mercer's father, Duke, the band also plays contemporary pieces written by members of its band. And being a member of the Duke Ellington Band can be, at times, a rather confusing thing.
I read that Al Sears, one of the tenor men in the past, had said that when he joined the band, he was astounded to find he was playing music completely different than what the rest of the band was playing.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's because he took Ben Webster's chair, and the band was composed mainly of 4 saxophones. And the music that Ben had to play had to be developed apart from what existed in 4 parts before, because he would play by ear, and all of a sudden he'd land on Johnny Hodges' note, or he'd land on Harry's note, and all that, and say, "Get off my note," Finally, he had to keep picking a melody or something that went with it that was away from what was written in the arrangement.
The Ellington Band Mercer brought to Loras College was a 16-piece outfit, and 7 of those members played with Duke Ellington when he was alive. We asked him about them.
When I think of the original band, I think of the band I heard in 1927, and that was Duke Ellington, Wellman Breaux, Sonny Greer on drums. Cootie wasn't even there. There was a guy by the name of Bubba Malley, Tricky Sam, Odo Hardwick, Bonnie Bigard, and Harry Connick. And at that point, Johnny Hodges hadn't joined. I think the band that most people think of when they say original band is the band of the 40s, when Johnny Hodges was there, Cootie was there, also Ben Webster and Bonnie Bigard, and you just about had the richest display of talent at that point. But when you say original band, I think the best concept, the best way to explain it is that we have an orchestra that has 7 men who, in a sense, were contemporary to Ellington. So, for instance, Anita has been with us. We're 6 years old, and she was with my father for 2 years prior to his passing. The same with Rocky White, also Barry Lee Hall, Malcolm Taylor, Chuck Connors, who's been in the band 18 years, and Harold Minerve. So that's sort of like our group of seniors that has, sort of like the nucleus that forms the rest of the orchestra.
Well, now obviously you have to recruit new people too. What is an audition for a member of the Duke Ellington band like?
Well, the man that takes the spot is prepared for before the spot empties.
Oh, I see.
People are interested in the band, and we play from place to place. So one day you look up and you see 5 trumpets, or you see 6 saxophones, because someone expressed an interest in playing with the band. So we tell him, okay, well, you work with us tonight, and let's see what you do. If he's interesting or a very good musician, we make a note of it. When the chair empties, we call him back.
Is that right?
Right.
So you keep it sort of like a resume file in a way?
Yeah, because we try them all over, and it's no wonder that the band itself now is composed of guys from just about across the United States. And now we have 5 from Texas, and 2 from Indianapolis, 1 from Cincinnati, 1 from Dayton, 2 from Detroit, Michigan, 3 people from New York, and so on, and 2 out of Jersey. So that the band, as it stands, is always as it was, of what might be termed the band of, say, the 60s. There wasn't but one man in the band who lived in New York. That was Russell Procope. Everyone else lived away from it.
Now, you took over the band. I understand you took the band out, I think, was it the day after your father's funeral? That must have been was that kind of rough, or was there an agreement that you would take the band on?
When you've been in show business like I have from childhood, and you go through the rigors of it. I mean, for instance, Ella Fitzgerald lost her sister while she was doing the European tour. So she passed. Ella took one day off, flew to her funeral in Los Angeles, and flew back and made a date the next time. It's not that you're just avid believers in the fact that the show must go on, but it's something like that. You get used to all of the trials and tribulations as you go along, the deaths and whatever occur.
We'll have more with Mercer Ellington on the Duke Ellington Orchestra when the Off-Ramp continues. You're listening to The Off-Ramp with Bob Smith and a conversation I had with the son of the late great Duke Ellington, Mercer Ellington, in 1980 when Mercer was touring with the orchestra. A Duke Ellington orchestra after the Duke's death in 1974 was not planned. Mercer said its continued existence was due to one invitation.
In a sense, it was fate that played a hand in our continuing with the schedule because Ed Riley, who represented IBM, had a handshake with Ellington in the hospital and said, Duke, I want the band to play the convention, whether it's with you or without you, meaning that he felt that maybe the band would have to go and play it while Pop was still in the hospital. But as it turned out, we wound up without him completely. And the next 6 months, dates that we had stayed in as a memoriam to him. People just thought when the band came through, they'd pay a tribute to Ellington. While we were doing that, we got other dates, and here we are 6 years later.
The Duke Ellington Orchestra of the 1980s gave its audiences the standards, hot instrumental solos,
and some sizzling contemporary vocal work by singer Anita Moore. But the legacy of the man who founded the band, the man who started the drive toward diversity, lives on.
There are stories that when the big bands were all breaking up because of the money situation, transportation costs, that the Duke was supporting the band by his own royalties from his compositions.
And that's what's kept us going. In fact, that's actually what's helped us out. I say in the first 2 to 3 years that we've existed, the royalties from ASCAP and from the songs and things of that sort.
You're writing a book on your father.
Yeah, it's in a sense criticism. It's vengeance involved in the book because he left me, and I'm mad about that. And in addition, it's more personalized. We call it Duke Ellington in person. And we give away some of the sort of inner semantics that Duke Ellington employed with the guys he worked with, some with the ladies that he lived with, and sort of his basic philosophy, and some of the in a sense, beguiling that he was able to do, and also Ellington was a man who was very dictatorial in a very subtle way. I mean, he always had you doing what he wanted you to do. You never knew how you wound to land up in that spot, but there it was.
Mercer joined his dad's band in the 1950s, first in the brass section and then as an arranger.
I joined the band first, and I played trombone in the 50s.
Trombone.
And then later, he hired me as a road manager. And I said on one condition that I played in the trumpet section, which is where I've been trying to get for years.
Is that nepotism, do we call it?
Yeah, in reverse.
Right.
So, anyhow, I got the job and we stayed there right through the 70s. And as the years went on, or days, I should say, Cootie was sitting back in the section. He said, man, get out front and start talking. Somebody's got to talk to these people. And I was racing back and forth trying to play parts because I had very little solo roles. And finally, I just left the horn back there. But I still hang on to it and blow a couple of notes here and there, dances.
Doing the book, have you found anything about your father that you weren't aware of before?
No, I knew mostly. I idolized him so much that as I was growing up, I would hang with all the people he knew and all his buddies that he had gone with, hung around with through the years. And I'd sit there and spend hours and days talking to these people, just learning events and incidents of things that happened in the past. And by the time I used to embarrass him tremendously because we'd be out, and this is like after I'd gotten to about 45 or 50, and we'd be talking about something, and someone would mention the Saratoga Club or one of the old dates and all, and I'd go through a complete description and detail everything that happened in there without even waiting for him to come up with the answer. And he says, tell them also that you weren't there.
It made him look older.
During our conversation, Mercer Ellington mentioned several famous New York clubs that his father played in, so we asked him about the most famous Harlem night spot, the Cotton Club. Duke's first big break was a 3-year run playing there, and Mercer told us it was sometimes easier for a Cotton Club musician to be hired than fired.
The Cotton Club was on Lenox Avenue, and it wasn't necessarily a 3-year engagement. In those days, it was luck in the sense that he got the job to work in the Cotton Club, and it was run by mobsters. People like Jack Legs Diamond used to come through there all the time, Oni Madden. And, I never developed any fear of gangdom or anything. That's all because I had learned that they were people first without finding out about it. And they used to play bridge and all that stuff up there. So that as the years went by, I mean, you didn't sign a contract. You had to get their permission to leave.
Oh.
So an old man was able to go out and play a couple of years of one-nighters, and he was on the condition that he would come back and do further years in the future with them. So he went back to Lenox Avenue. The club closed, and then it moved downtown to about 46th Street. It's, if you go by there now, and I don't even think that name is up there anymore, but it's what they used to call the Latin Quarter. That was a downtown Cotton Club. And as the days went on, the bands found other places to go, and they had less attractions to draw on to support the club. It finally closed. But Louis was playing there, Louis Armstrong, and Cab, Ellington, Jimmy Lunsford, a band that's very, very hardly ever spoken of today.
Jimmy Lunsford, is that what you said?
Was in and out there. And all in all, the great bands, I mean, they just dwindled because there was no place for them to go. A place that was much more highly indicative of what happened to show business from those days is the disappearance of Savoy. Because, for instance, they've got the United States and its international brochure shows how there's a period of jazz involved, and they have a marquee on the Savoy Ballroom on New Year's Eve, and the orchestras appearing Count Basie, Duke Ellington, Fletcher Henderson, and Benny Goodman for $2.
$2?
$2 on a New Year's Eve.
That's amazing. Good Lord.
So it was that kind of an operation that really kept it alive in the show business. And all over the major cities had places like that. Milwaukee had the Eagles, and Chicago, Grand Terrace Ballroom, and so forth. But they disappeared.
So where do you play today?
We just keep moving. We've, for the most part, worked Europe, I'd say, about 1/3 of the year. At least we will have this year. We've been to Mexico, Japan so far. May the 6th we leave for South America. In the latter part of June we go to Australia, New Zealand, come back, and then go to Europe for July. And with that, it gives us enough time in between to find the other places within the states that keep us moving around.
How do you know where you are? I mean,
Well, you know, the problem is figuring out what's going on today, because you're so living in the future so much. For instance, last week I was involved with getting the music for the sacred concert over to the choir in Munich, getting the visas straight for Australia, and also getting instrumentation and names ready for South America. So that while you're thinking all this, and Chuck comes up and says, what hotel are we going to be in tomorrow? I don't know. That's too close to the present. Get to a place where you're just totally oblivious. So either what day this person's Sunday will run by you. Sometimes you're not aware of it. And we were fortunate this year in a way. We had it with mixed emotions because we were used to spending Christmas holidays and Easter with our families. Everybody just goes home. But this year we worked through both holidays. So
do the families try to join you sometimes? In
oh yeah,
progress?
like for instance, with two of the wives on board now, and next thing you know, if we go someplace like Disneyland or Knoxbury Farm,
Well, the kids are going to come on.
you see around about 6 or 7 kids come on with that bus and dogs and everything else.
when you hear you talk, you think that if in your case at least, the big band business is still booming.
Oh yeah, booming in both music and babies. They say, well, when do you take a vacation? We take a vacation at work, because one of the dates or one of the places we'll go to will be Nice and Cannes for about 4 days, and we would never be able to afford the vacation in that area if they didn't provide the rooms.
One way the band survives financially these days is that some of its members double as roadies, putting up and tearing down the equipment after the performance for extra pay. And you might say that Mercer is, well, bus captain.
I'll just go out there and put in an appearance and make sure that those who are not ready and getting together and on the bus will be there shortly.
Do you handle that yourself? Do you have a road manager, or how does that work?
Everybody, what you see is what you get. Every job I ever had with the band, I still retain. My first job was assistant band boy, and then later on the manager and band leader. So now I'm still the road manager. And on stage, Rocky is the stage manager, our drummer. He takes care of the equipment. And we move and we keep it reduced. Everybody gets more pay, and we're able to move more concisely, particularly when we fly.
But who's the assistant band boy these days?
I am.
Oh, you still got that job.
I still got the job.
Mercer Ellington and the Duke Ellington Orchestra. This is Bob Smith.
Shortly after this interview, Mercer Ellington became the conductor of the Broadway musical Sophisticated Ladies, a review of his dad's music played nightly by Mercer and the Duke Ellington Orchestra. The show was a smash success and ran until 1983. After the Broadway run, Mercer kept the Ellington Orchestra on the road into the late 1980s. When Mercer disbanded the unit, he settled in Denmark with his family, and he handed over to Danish radio a colossal archive of unissued Duke Ellington recordings which his father had made over the years. These were broadcast in their entirety, and the many hours of previously unknown music caused a sensation among Duke Ellington enthusiasts throughout the world. At the time of Mercer's death in 1996, the British newspaper The Independent remarked, "Had his father not been such a great and prolific composer, Mercer Ellington would have been held in higher regard for his own writing." Among his compositions were Pigeons and Peppers in 1937, Moon Mist, Jumpin' Pumpkins, and a classic the Ellington Band frequently played, Things Aren't What They Used to Be. Today, the Duke Ellington experience continues to delight audiences under the direction of one of Duke's grandsons, Mercer's son, Paul Ellington. Well, that's our show for now. We thank you for listening to this interview with Mercer Ellington, the son of Duke Ellington, recorded back in 1980. It's time to leave the off-ramp and get back on the expressway of life, but we hope you join us next time for the off-ramp with Bob Smith. The Off-Ramp with Bob Smith is produced in association with CPL Radio and the Cedarbrook Public Library, Cedarburg, Wisconsin.